Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down how two massive philosophical movements emerged at the exact same time to completely challenge the ancient world order. We are traveling back to the 6th century BCE in India, which is, honestly, a glorious turning point in human history. We're going to look at two incredible thinkers who stepped up to offer radical alternatives to a deeply entrenched system.
But to really understand why these movements took off, we have to put ourselves in their shoes. Imagine, you're living in a society where your own spiritual peace is locked behind a massive paywall and dictated entirely by your birth status. Seriously, what happens when an entire society is essentially priced out of its own religion? Well, that sets the stage for our historical crisis, a time of intense unrest where the common people were desperately searching for answers.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at that religious unrest. Second, we'll meet Mahavira and explore the Jain path. Third, Buddha and the middle way. Fourth, we'll compare the two paths side by side. And finally, we'll look at their golden ages and eventual declines. Let's get into it.
Section 1. A time of religious unrest. To truly appreciate just how revolutionary Jainism and Buddhism were, we first have to take a hard look at the religious status quo of the time.
The Vedic system back then, it had become incredibly oppressive. The caste system was dangerously rigid, actively marginalizing people, especially the Shudras, who were completely barred from temples and basic rites. On top of that, religious rituals had become so complex and wildly expensive that only the elite priests could even perform them. But here's a super fascinating economic angle. The agricultural economy relied heavily on iron plows, which obviously needed animals to pull them. Yet indiscriminate mass animal sacrifices for these religious ceremonies were actively hurting the farmers. Add in the fact that the highly philosophical teachings of the Upanishads were just way too complex for everyday folks to grasp, and you've got a recipe for a breaking point.
And compounding the whole problem was a massive communication barrier. The ancient Vedas were written in Sanskrit, a language strictly controlled and understood only by the priests. This basically allowed them to dominate every single aspect of life, from birth to death. The people desperately needed simple, accessible spiritual guidance in a language they actually used day to day.
Moving to Section 2, Mahavira and the Jain path. Let's meet the first revolutionary who looked at this broken, unequal system and offered a radical, deeply disciplined alternative.
The sheer level of sacrifice in Mahavira's story is just incredible. Born around 540 BCE as a prince in the kingdom of Vaishali, Vardhamana was brought up with literally every luxury you could imagine. But the material world just didn't hold him. At exactly 30 years old, he made the ultimate choice. He just walked away from the whole shebang, his royal home, his family, everything, and embraced the incredibly austere life of a monk. For the next 12 years, he practiced severe meditation and incredible penance, going without food for long stretches and traveling barefoot, completely focused on conquering his human desires.
Through this intense 12-year struggle, he attained Kevala Jnana. He became a Jina, a conqueror of passions, and was recognized by his followers as the 24th and final Tirthankar. Now, a quick point of clarification here. A Tirthankar is not some god who came down from heaven. It's an enlightened soul born as a normal human being who attains perfection through sheer, intense meditation. He proved that human beings could achieve ultimate spiritual liberation entirely through their own willpower.
So, what was his actual solution to the societal crisis? He preached the 3 jewels to free the soul from the cycle of rebirth: right belief, right knowledge, and right conduct. And to live this out, he established 5 vows. The absolutely crucial one, ahimsa, total ultimate nonviolence. Jainism taught that every object has a soul, meaning you shouldn't harm even a tiny insect. Crucially, Mahavira outright rejected the caste system and the authority of the Vedas. He championed a classless society, and, perfectly addressing that language barrier we talked about, he delivered his teachings in Prakrit, the everyday language of the common people.
Section 3. Buddha and the Middle Way. Right around the exact same time, just in a neighboring region, another prince was on a wildly similar journey, but he ended up arriving at a drastically different philosophy.
Meet Siddhartha Gautama, born around 563 BCE. Like Mahavira, he was born into royalty, totally insulated from the suffering of the outside world. But his sheltered life completely shattered when he witnessed the 4 great sights: an old man, a sick person, a corpse, and a wandering ascetic. Seeing this deeply perturbed him. It forced him to face the inescapable realities of pain and suffering, while also sparking this hope that there had to be a way out.
His journey was intense,
At 29, in what's known as the Great Renunciation, he left his sleeping family to seek the truth. For 7 whole years, he wandered and actually practiced the exact same severe austerities and near starvation that the Jains favored. But then he realized something profound. Punishing the physical body doesn't actually bring enlightenment. So he pivots. He sits under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya, meditates for 49 days, and that's where he attains enlightenment, officially becoming the Buddha.
The really brilliant part is how Buddha synthesized this realization. He broke it all down into a super logical, step-by-step progression called the Four Noble Truths. 1. The world is full of misery. 2. The cause of this misery is desire. 3. Misery can be ended by killing the desire. And 4. Desire is killed by following his eightfold path, a path of right action, right thought, and right living. Notice, he didn't preach extreme starvation, but he didn't preach worldly indulgence either. He prescribed a completely revolutionary middle path. Section 4. Two paths compared. All right, so we have Mahavira and Buddha. Both rejected the caste system, both totally bypassed the Brahmin priests, and both spoke directly to the people in common tongues like Prakrit and Pali. But how did their internal beliefs actually differ? Well, even within their own movements, there were massive debates over just how strict they should be. After Mahavira's death, Jainism actually split into 2 major sects. You had the Digambaras, the sky-clad, who maintained extreme austerity, meaning they wore literally no clothes, kept massive fasts, and believed women had to be reborn as men to achieve liberation. On the flip side were the Shwetambaras, the white-clad, who wore white clothing, rejected the need for extreme penance, and believed liberation was accessible to anyone in this life.
Buddhism experienced its own huge schism, which really solidified during the Fourth Buddhist Council. The Mahayana sect, the greater vehicle, actually ended up elevating Buddha to the status of a god. They engaged in idol worship and started writing their early works in Sanskrit. Conversely, the Hinayana sect, the lesser vehicle, viewed Buddha strictly as a great preacher and teacher. They kept their texts in the common language of Pali and just focused on attaining nirvana through his original teachings.
But the single biggest fundamental divergence between these 2 immense religions, it's all about the soul. Jainism firmly believed in the soul and reincarnation, and it maintained its salvation absolutely required a life of complete austerity and extreme penance. Buddhism, amazingly, did not believe in the soul and explicitly rejected extreme penance in favor of that balanced middle path. And this one philosophical difference would completely shape how each religion expanded across the globe.
Which brings us to Section 5, Golden Ages and Declines. Let's see how these fundamentally different approaches actually impacted their survival, their growth, and their eventual legacies.
Because it advocated that more accessible middle path without the severe austerity, Buddhism absolutely exploded in popularity. It gained massive royal patronage. Through early councils, powerful kings like Ajatasattu, Kalasoka, and the legendary Emperor Ashoka threw the full weight of their empires behind the religion. Under Ashoka, Buddhism spread way beyond India into places like Tibet, China, and Ceylon. They held these highly organized councils to preserve texts and mobilize vast missionary networks. It was, honestly, a massive institutional success story.
But here's the irony. That immense institutional success planted the seeds for its own downfall in its native land. Over the centuries, the Buddhist monasteries, or sanghas, got wealthy and incredibly corrupt, filling up with pleasure-loving folks rather than strict monks. Plus, the Mahayana sect started practicing idol worship, which is literally the very thing early Buddhism rebelled against. As royal funding dried up and Brahmanism saw a powerful revival, Buddhism weakened. The final devastating blow came from Turkish invasions, which specifically targeted the wealthy monasteries, plundering the wealth and forcing the remaining monks to flee. Jainism, on the other hand, never received that massive global royal backing. Yet it survived deeply within India to this very day. How? Well, because of their extreme strictness regarding ahimsa, Jain followers couldn't be farmers. They couldn't risk killing insects in the soil. So they became prominent traders and businessmen instead. This fostered a fiercely loyal, incredibly wealthy brotherhood and a powerful guild system. They used their wealth to build magnificent architecture, like the breathtaking Dilwara temples in Rajasthan, and they maintained strict internal discipline that protected their core traditions from corruption.
As we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a truly fascinating historical paradox to ponder. Both Jainism and Buddhism started as grassroots revolutions against an elite, exclusive religious establishment.
Yet one survived by remaining a tightly knit, highly disciplined community of merchants, while the other became a sprawling global empire that eventually collapsed in its homeland under the weight of its own wealth and deviations. It really begs the question, if a movement's identity relies entirely on rejecting the status quo, what happens when its success inevitably makes it the new status quo? Think on that. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the 6th century BCE, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.